Okay, this is the initial meeting of the Climate Resilience Committee. We're going to be addressing order number 21-100-8299. So basic, rough agenda. The intent is kind of talk about what the issues are. There's a lot that can be covered within this topic. So going to start with just the committee members speaking and addressing what their concerns are, what they think the Climate Resiliency Committee should address. Then I'm giving the opportunity for other council members to speak as well. We also have Sean Duvall and Priscilla Ryder to speak as well, and I appreciate for them showing up. We will talk about the scope and rules in a follow-on meeting. They'll be scheduled probably sometime next month. If any councilor has any questions, raise their hand. I'll acknowledge them. They can ask the questions. But this is really about, how serious we take climate change within the city and within the council. Because, this is an old phrase, think global, act local. And acting local really starts with municipality action. So I think that's important. I found this definition online at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. Climate resilience is the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to hazardous events, trends, or disturbances related to climate. Improving climate resilience involves assessing how climate change will create new or alter current climate-related risks and taking steps to better cope with these risks. There has been a history within the city as far as identifying and addressing climate and the environment. The Conservation Commission has been around for quite a long time, as the previous president, Ed Clancy, can remind us about. There's been sustainability plans for 2008 as well as 2020. And there's also open space plans and other actions and plannings that we've done already. The next step, the city has jurisdiction over housing and building stock. I think this is really what I see as the biggest issue we can confront. A third of emissions in the Northeast is building and housing stock. It's furnaces, and it's mostly being done during the winter. And everything that we can do to basically reduce or transition furnaces from oil or gas to heat pumps, as an example, it would be a big win in cleaning the air of our city as well as reducing the impact of climate change. Stretch codes, there's a lot of municipalities now supporting stretch codes. I think we might need to look into that. What I found interesting is that the latest housing proposals that have come to the city were highly energy efficient and were not using fossil fuels. And we made note of that during their review, and I think that's hopefully a good trend we see going forward. But the issue basically is that the housing stock that we have, the building housing stock we have, pretty constantly emits carbon dioxide either through furnaces or pellet stove or wood stoves or something like that. Trash and recycling is going up in price, and recycling is moving away from single stream. Probably the one question we have, and I'm throwing this up and we don't need to talk about it today, but paper and cardboard are very valuable. The problem is when they get introduced to the single stream, they get contaminated. And we're making a lot of money just collecting cardboard at the transfer station. And if there's another way to take that to another level, I think there'd be a big benefit to that. And I think the key to this is as we look into what can be done, at the end of the day, this is something that has to have scientific and financial soundness. And if you do it right, not only are you protecting and saving the environment, you're saving money for the municipality and for the people of the community. So as far as success stories goes, with solar and electric and transportation, municipal aggregation is 100% renewable. Now, the issue basically is it's where we're purchasing our energy from is literally not connected to the Northeast grid. So there's an issue with that, but hopefully as the wind turbines start being built up off the coast, we can take advantage of that. We got solar on our schools, which is a huge win. Department of Public Works has a bunch of electric vehicles, and I give them great credit for that. The police have gotten 4 hybrid interceptors, and they're pleasantly surprised with those. We also have introduced solar overlay districts, so we know if there's an opportunity to do a large-scale solar deployment within the city, we know the mechanism to do it, and we're right now kind of in the process of trying to get one at the old landfill on Bolton Street. Smart buildings is basically a more efficient use of energy and electricity. There's a lot of heat pumps. What I understand is that these heating systems and cooling systems that are in the chambers is actually heat pumps. So we've got rid of the old school and we got into the new technology. And the housing units that we have for public housing or low-income housing are also using heat pumps as well. There's other possibilities. I've always been a big fan of geothermal, even though it's a very expensive proposition. But there's also battery cogeneration for electricity and heat. especially for large facilities. And there's no place in Marlborough to do wind. We don't have that much wind. Trying to phase out the carbon-based fuels and not burning trash and figuring out how our trash basically gets disposed of without being burned. There are some companies that are very forward-thinking in the environmental movement. Ambry, which is, it's off of the Brigham Street Industrial Park. That's an MIT spin-off that is doing game-changing technology for storage of energy for utility-grade storage. And I wish them the best of luck, and we should keep an eye on them and do what we can to help them. Sundrum Solar in Hudson has another interesting novel technology where they have mounting systems with solar panels that basically absorb the heat from the solar panels and therefore increase the efficiency of the solar and also gaining energy from the heat. And I think as far as business opportunities go, we need to figure out how to get more companies like this coming to Marlborough. These are the type of companies that create good paying jobs and have real benefit to the environment. And as far as options and ideas, there's a lot of money and proposals that can be sent out there, submit applications for state and federal programs, and our city does an outstanding job already to trying to address that and putting those things in place, and I give the folks great credit for that. There's environmental benefits as far as the reduction of emissions within the city. The phrase that I keep is basically any renewable energy system that we put in place in the city means there's less imported energy into the community. And at the long run, that creates an energy independence and also creates more stability for us in our energy sources. The question is, to the council, is basically how can the council take an active role when it comes to these issues? Some of the issues would be, let's say, a betterment or a tip finance, looking at approaches used in other means for replacing furnaces. That's not something that we can approve ourselves. We need to work through the state with that. I see that as an IPS issue that can be addressed because we did that with MEDC. So I think that that's something we can address. And again, it still boils down to reducing the local emissions, increasing the air quality of our city. MEDC has a lot of incentives that are put in place, and just possibly having MEDC work with businesses and communities to reduce fuel costs and emissions, because the less energy or fuels a business is using, the more efficient they are and the more effective they are in running their business. It really does impact the bottom line. And it's working with the local businesses and the large corporate facilities, I think, we need to look into somehow to address that. Also, as far as the municipality, I think that we have the opportunity to lead by example as far as optimizing and reducing emissions. There's been a lot done already. We're starting to see electric trucks coming onto the market, not just from Tesla, but from Ford, and GM's on its way. The heavy vehicles are definitely not there yet, but I think they're going to be someday. I think it's more likely that the first heavy vehicles are going to be actually from hybrids versus straight electric. So part of what I wanted to talk about also is the importance of metrics. How do we measure how effective we are in reducing emissions, or how do we figure out how good we're doing? I sent notes from an MIT Sustainability Forum to the committee back in April, and it was part of the Sloan School Business Sustainability Initiative. And the key is you can't improve what you can't measure. And there's lots of talk as far as how do organizations and groups grow, how does the use of fossil fuels grow. Exponential growth doesn't last forever. It's mostly like an X curve. You start small, you start growing big, and then you kind of cap out. But there's issues with what happens if you go beyond what's possible and you kind of overshoot. The example that they talked about in the conference was the Irish potato famine, because the Irish are doing real well with potatoes until this blight came in and kind of wiped them out, and they went through one of the greatest tragedies in Europe. But also, company Digital Equipment Corporation, they had 23 buildings in Marlborough, and we were getting a lot of our tax base from that. And when DEC went down, we had to transition away from that. So that's also an issue of overshoot. But I think it's important to pick the metrics, but you got to be careful because the metrics can come back and haunt you. The triple bottom line was something that was introduced 30 years ago, where you address a corporation based on 3 dimensions of performance: the social, the environmental, and the financial. And I think that that's also something to keep an eye on. And the catch is if you do your metrics right, it feeds back into the system so you can improve it. So another part that was covered at the MIT Forum was donut economics. This was fascinating. With donut economics, you have this sweet spot, which is a loop where if you're limited in certain issues and there's a whole bunch of factors involved, if you shorten that, then society and civilization has a hard time to grow and stuff like that. And then you hit this sweet spot and things just all line, the stars align, you can grow and expand your civilization. And then you got to be careful because basically it can grow beyond that and beyond the limits, which you get into the outside, what they call the ecological ceiling. And so you got to keep the society within that donut to basically maintain growth and maintain civilization. So I think that's important too, as we look into things, how to address it. Lastly, and then I'll go to the next committee members, I think the key takeaway is that, this committee won't see much delegated from the council, but I think that as part of the discussion, we can talk about issues that we can propose back to the council. The biggest issue, again, which I talked about earlier, is existing and building housing stock emissions. How do we address that? With heat pumps, geothermal, or cogeneration. And cogeneration reduces it but doesn't eliminate it, but it can still do it. I'm a big fan of best practices, learning what other communities are doing and using that within our own community, not try to reinvent the wheel. And I think it's critical that we look at this and figure out how we can take action for future generations in Marlborough.